All right, a very good afternoon. We're back and we are here with another leadership webinar, and I'm just so excited to have another phenomenal speaker. And I really want to thank everyone again for, just sharing all these different posts, getting involved, and the whole purpose is really to influence. And I think that's the biggest thing with leadership. And today is no different. I'm very excited. I've got a very good friend here, a good mate who is, in my terms, the guru of conditioning, sports conditioning and wellness. I've been fortunate enough to work alongside him before. And he's really going to give us insights into what goes behind the scenes to become a high performance athlete. I think a lot of the time what we do is we hear the romantic side of sports. We see the tries scored, tackles made, the goals scored, all this, the player stats, which is brilliant. But what we don't often talk about is the hard work that gets done behind the scenes. And it's gentlemen like this particular guest speaker that I have today who are the heroes in terms of making the dreams become a reality. I love the quote that says, what you do when nobody is watching is what separates a champion from everybody else. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome the next guest, Mr. Myles Usher. How are you, buddy?
Hey, Gav. How's it going?
Yeah, very well. And again, thanks for giving up your time. We really appreciate it. And I know that, if you are involved in any sort of sport at any level, if you have a parent and your son or daughter is involved in any sports, or you're a coach, then you're certainly going to get a lot out of this talk. So again, thanks for giving up your time. Just to give you a quick bio, if you don't know who Myles is, he matriculated from DHS Durban High School. He studied at the University of KwaZulu-Natal and graduated with honors in exercise science. He was the director of wellness and conditioning at Westville Boys High School for 4 years and currently doing the exact same thing at Durban High School. He worked with many high-performance representative teams, and if I could name a few, the South African men's hockey side. He's worked with the KZN Raiders hockey side, the KZN Coastals under 18A hockey side, the South African under 16 high-performance hockey squad, Dolphins Cub cricket, and a lot more. That's just to name a few. He is also the co-founder of Merck Athletic Development. So if you haven't followed that on Instagram, please do so. There's some fascinating stuff on that platform. And when Myles is not investing time in athletes, he is an avid athlete himself. He enjoys running, paddling, mountain biking, and surfing. Myles has also completed 6 Comrade marathons, the Doozy Canoe Marathon, and the Ironman 70.3. So he is a man with a lot of wisdom. And I'm going to go straight into the first question. Myles, what is your philosophy of sport conditioning, and how important is it in sport today?
Yeah, Gav, thanks for the question. Basically, I've kind of chopped and changed with my philosophy over the years. As you come out of varsity, you sort of have all this information that you've learned, but as you get to deal with athletes, you try different things, you actually sort of nurture and develop your philosophy over the years. There's many ways to skin a cat in terms of strength and conditioning. There's obviously basic foundations and basic principles that you can follow, but a lot of the time you'll never find really 2 conditioning coaches who will do things exactly the same way. So I think before I get onto my philosophy, whatever your philosophy is, I think it's just important to really stick to that system and fully sort of get everyone to buy into that. And that's pretty much the way to go. So in terms of my philosophy, I try to keep things quite simple. Simpler the better. It's easier for players to understand, and you focus sort of on the fundamentals. Obviously, there is a balance between trying to develop sort of basic athletic movement patterns, and then you've also got your sort of sport-specific movements. So there's a balance between the two. You generally try to get an athlete to just move well, get them to sort of their strength requirements and that sort of thing. And then you can sort of work on incorporating in their specific movements to their sport. So there's a couple of movements, there's about 5 or 6 of them that we try to work on and try to nurture. So the first one is your sort of upper body push. So sort of pushing anything away from your body. In a variety of sports, you can have you have to throw a ball or fend a player in rugby, fend a player off, or whatever the case may be. So you work in an upper body sort of push plane, obviously above your head and out in front of you. Then on the sort of converse of that, you've got your pull movement. So in a variety of things such as paddling, rowing, hockey, there's a lot of sort of pulling with rotation. So that's quite a big focus. Then if you move on to sort of your lower body, you've got your squat-based movements and your hip hinge, which is like an example of something like a deadlift, where obviously in your running motion, you're trying to get as much strength as you can out of your sort of ankle, knee, and hip joints. And using a lot of those sort of squat and hinge exercises, you can develop the triple extension in your lower extremities, and obviously then work on your strength and your speed. The next one is something we call like a loaded carry. So if you sort of get your posture nice and solid, get your shoulders set back, get your core activated, your glutes activated, and then you load your body with, say, kettlebells, and you walk while trying to sort of maintain your posture, and that generally develops nice, good strength. And then we work on our core as much as we can, and then there's obviously the energy system demands in sports. So that's sort of your fitness. Some will be a little bit more aerobic, some will be a little bit more anaerobic. And there's a lot of different ways that you can work on sort of developing those. I'm quite a big fan of incorporating like conditioning games. So say for hockey or soccer, sort of small-sided games where one team has less players, and that sort of kind of meets the demands of the sport with the amount of ball and play time and the amount of sort of rest time between sort of phases. There is obviously the need at times to do your sort of shuttle-based stuff, or your little bit more monotonous work, if you can call it that. You'll find that more in your pre-season, but sometimes you have to get players up to a certain level, and I think it's just good to have a bit of a balance and mix it up and sort of channel everything towards where you want to go. So as I said, keeping in mind those sort of movement patterns, you've got to try and keep things sort of as simple as possible. I don't know if you've heard of the strength and conditioning coach for New Zealand, Nick Gill. He's been with them for many years, and he's a legend in the game, and he pretty much uses about 9 basic movements, and he always says, just get those basic movements perfect, get guys moving well. Like I've also heard a lot of conditioning or top conditioning coaches say, if you keep changing the exercises that you're doing, you're actually not going to get good at those exercises. So there's a balance between finding what works for you, and I just find trying to keep it as simple and as basic as possible is the right way to go. Obviously, you've got your basic sort of conditioning principles, such as progressive overload. So either adding volume into your training every sort of progressive week, or adding intensity. There's different ways to sort of manipulate guys to sort of reach their goals. But as long as everything's following like a general structure, and every week you're kind of building up, you're going to be sort of in a good space. Another very important sort of aspect of strength and conditioning, which I like to pay a lot of attention to, is something you call your sort of injury prevention work, or your prehab. So a conditioning coach will a lot of the time work quite closely with your sort of biokineticist, and those are sort of things of just getting your sort of joints to function properly. With rugby players, for example, you'll do a lot of sort of band work, getting all the little muscles activated so that your shoulder is sort of in the best possible sort of position, and it's sort of everything's firing properly. So when you're taking those contacts in sort of tackles, you've got the best possible sort of position or opportunity to preserve that joint. So yeah, like the most important thing with what we do is making sure that we're keeping players on the field.
No, great, thanks, Mel. And I think that is particularly very interesting, and a lot of insight there for parents, because a lot of parents sometimes drop off their son or their daughter at the crack of dawn. They pick them up extremely late. So it's really nice to have an understanding from someone like you and your mind exactly what's happening at those trainings. So Myles, from your experience, and I know that you've been involved with a number of different sports, and you help in multi-talented sportsmen, how has conditioning in sports changed over the past few years? And do you feel that South Africa is setting the bar in terms of conditioning in world sports?
Thanks, Gav. I think things have changed a lot, especially since I started. Obviously, sometimes it's difficult there's that balance between results-driven sport and actually developing the character of the boys, and the process is very difficult to sort of get that sort of balance right. So, like especially working with a couple of rugby coaches and hockey coaches over the last few years, you kind of learn to try and get that balance. So we often forget that, you know what I mean, we want these boys to go out there and perform. There's a lot of pressure on them, but at the same time, they've also got schoolwork to do. The seniors have a lot of leadership roles and duties at the school. You know what I mean? There's a lot of pressure on these guys. So in terms of sort of developing a system that works, I think you've got to sort of factor those sort of things in. In terms of innovations and how things have changed, there's obviously a lot of technologies that have sort of come out over the last few years, things such as GPS analysis. So it's not always like available to school boy like participants, but you can use it to sort of help load up training, structure a session. So say, for example, I could go to a coach and say, we need to cover X amount of meters today, based on the fact that they are running X amount of meters per minute on average. You need to structure a session to run for 40 minutes in order for them not to sort of get that sort of into that overtraining sort of bracket. There are things such as velocity-based training, which is quite like a big thing at the moment. You get these little devices that you can connect to your bars. And as you say, do like an explosive lift, it'll give you a figure as to how much power output you're putting. And there's something called the strength velocity curve where you're obviously building a strength base in the beginning, and then you work to trying to produce that force at speed. So there's certain sort of parameters with these sort of pieces of equipment that you're getting that you use to kind of manipulate your training. So that's something that's coming into even at schoolboy level now, in terms of wellness. So your sort of nutrition and recovery, there's a lot of apps that you can use to sort of check on boys and see if they're getting those overtraining symptoms. There's something I like to use, something called a tap test. So on a phone, you just tap as many times as you can in a certain amount of time, and it can pick up like a neurological sort of change between last week and this week. And those are just little tools that you can use with technology that have kind of changed things. So as I said earlier, less is sometimes more, considering the amount of different sort of things that the boys have on their plate. So it has sort of gone in waves, but I've kind of tried to get to a point where you sort of hit that sweet spot of getting the right amount of stimulation without sort of putting the boys into that burnout phase. In terms of also innovations or sort of changes, there's a lot of things that I've tried over the last couple of years with especially Jeremy McLaren and Jub Zulu with the Westfield First side. This last year, we tried something different where we would put boys into a circuit training. So it'll be like 8 exercises for say 40 seconds on, 20 seconds off, and put them under a certain level of fatigue. And then we'd send them into like a 5-6 minute block of ball and play. So now they're forced to think on their feet while they're under fatigue. So we tried that out. We hadn't really done it before, but just sort of brainstorming and the coaches sort of coming up with ideas. We implemented that last year, and it seemed to work really well. Another thing that I've sort of found that works really well, or as sort of I found sort of success with it, is that you need to, especially in rugby, you need to do a lot of body contact over a progressive amount of time in order to prevent those sort of concussions and shoulder injuries. So when Jeremy and Jub starts at the school, they are obviously bringing in a new sort of game plan, or whatever the case may be, or new system of play. And obviously you would understand that it takes quite a lot of time to implement and get the guys into all the calls and understanding. So when they started up, there was a very small amount of time to focus on stuff like contact, because that so much had changed when they started sort of working with the side. So we were in a position where we started our contact quite late in the season, and we found that there were actually quite a lot of concussions in that year. So coming out of the following year, Jubs is sort of the defensive guru, as most guys know him. He's very passionate about his defensive training. Going into the following year, he started sort of getting the guys doing upper body hits with bags and progressing it along. And we found that the following season, I don't think there was one shoulder injury or one concussion. So that was something really cool that we figured out, is that the boys need a chronic load of progressive contact on the shoulders, neck strengthening stuff in order to sort of progress. So those are just a few of the things that we've developed with. One thing that I found is that youngsters need structure. There was so much on their plate, as I mentioned before, that sort of having nice documents with the calendar and boys, we have this there, we have this there, and then putting it on sort of the team's WhatsApp groups really does help them. Being organized and allowing them to sort of run autonomously without having to sort of think too much at times really does help them. So that is something that I think has changed with technologies and all of that sort of thing. That really does work. On to like the second part of your question, and you said it was about the benchmarking and how South Africa is sort of progressing. There is a sort of bit of a disadvantage in South Africa in terms of money and facilities available at sort of universities and that sort of thing. If you look overseas, especially in England and the States, there's amazing facilities with like a lot of resources for sort of club teams and provincial teams to integrate with universities and sort of test things out. So I think we are a little bit behind in that sense. But with that being said, we've got some really, really talented strength and conditioning coaches and some guys doing really good things. If you look, for example, with the Springboks winning the World Cup last year, Aled Walters, who came across from Munster, he was with Rassie when Rassie was the director of rugby over there. And he came into South Africa and he brought to them a wealth of experience. And I think the results sort of spoke for themselves, and you look how he performed at the World Cup. So I think that was, for rugby especially, that was a great sort of resource, because I think a lot of the stuff that he's brought in has now provided a platform for South African rugby to feed off, and also then upskill the sort of S&C guys coming through, and it's all integrated with the coaches as well. So I think that is great. Unfortunately, Ed Walters has left the Bokke now. He's just signed with the Leicester Tigers, so that is a tough one, but it also provides an opportunity possibly for one of our S&C guys coming through. A couple of like really good notable guys in South Africa who are doing great work is down here at the Sharks. Obviously, the Sharks had a really great start to the season. A lot of young guys coming through the ranks, really robust, explosive players. Like it was a beauty to watch guys like Pepsi Buthelezi coming through, Apelele Fassi. The guys are looking insane, and a lot of that's down to Tools and Teta and Jimmy Wright down at the Sharks. They're doing a great job. Obviously, they've nurtured their philosophies over the years. Jimmy especially is one of the most experienced guys around, and Tools has come into that role in the last couple of years, and I think they're doing really great things. On the other side of it, or a testament to the quality that we have, is a lot of our top S&C guys are sort of being poached or sort of given opportunities overseas. Johan Pretorius, who was previously at the Sharks, he's gone across along with David Fabricius, a guy I actually went to school with at DHS. They both at Worcester Warriors now, both South African guys. You look at Alan Temple-Jones, he's also at DHS Old Boy. He was with the Blitzbokke, he's now with the Irish Sevens. And then the Old Stormers strength and conditioning coach, Stefan de Toy, who's been given opportunity at Stade Francais. So I think it's a testament to the quality of the guys that we have.
No, fantastic. Myles, I'm going to shift slightly to probably one of the headaches that you get. I'm sure there's a couple of pressures and things you've got to deal with, but one of the headaches, I'm sure, at schoolboy level particularly, is the focus on heavyweight training, and probably more so in rugby. And a lot of the players want to get physically big, and they just want to overpower the opposition, and they think that's probably the most important aspect of conditioning. How difficult is it for you to convince these athletes of the long-term goal or the process rather than the short-term fix? And also, how do you get these players to buy into the philosophy that you mentioned at the start?
Yeah, Gav, it's a very good question, and it is something that's extremely, it is challenging. As I said, over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, I think I've I've learned from a lot of coaches, taken little bits and pieces from them, and I think I've kind of got a good idea of how to deal with that. I can obviously only talk from experience, but in terms of getting philosophy, a philosophy right, or getting the guys to buy into that, obviously there's a lot of fixation with a lot of guys on getting your sort of beach bodies and biceps, and you know what I mean, the Oaks wanted to be doing curls in the gym and that sort of thing. So yeah, a lot of guys without having knowledge, they're focusing on the extremities, sort of the sort of small muscles sort of on your legs and your arms, as opposed to the stuff from your sort of your base. So they try to focus on exercise like that, as opposed to your compound lifts, like your squatting, your deadlifting, and your bench pressing. So there's quite a good phrase that I like to use, is that you can't shoot a cannon from a canoe. So if you don't have that sort of base and work on the basics and your fundamental movement patterns, it's pointless sort of trying to do all these fancy sort of things. So with that being said, I try to explain to guys the why. So if we're doing a squat or a deadlift or whatever the case may be, I think you need to show them why you're doing those movements, how it helps them on the field. I think that is like a start, especially to get them to sort of buy into the process. Obviously, there's certain things like culture, team culture, and I'll get onto like a bit of a case study on how that's worked. I've like, especially in the last couple of years, you'll look at guys I work with like Brogan Bull, Mambo and Keys, Abandi and Temu, Larry and Conky. These guys are really, really, really talented, and I've been lucky enough through the systems that they've come through and the cultures that they've sort of developed with their coaches, that they've actually, it's been quite easy to get them to buy into and listen to what I have to say, and try and help them see that sort of that bigger picture in the sort of long-term goal. So yeah, that's been quite a good one, and yeah, testament to the coaches that I've dealt with. What we try to do is try and get guys to focus on their strength to weight ratio. So if you look at guys like Faf, de Klerk, guys like Ches and Colby, or Damien McKenzie, they're not the biggest of players, but their strength to weight ratio is really high. So instead of guys focusing on getting really massive, we try and get these guys as sort of potent and as strong within what they have, and not focusing too much on putting on bulk. So tied in with explaining them why we do things, and giving them resources to follow up on, and them going to learn as well. I think that builds in the process. I read a book recently called Conscious Coaching by American guy called Brett Bartholomew. And what that book sort of teaches you is how to deal with different types of people. So you may have like a young boy who's maybe like a sort of dominant force. He's been in the A teams all the way through. He's played provincial levels, but he may have his insecurities or whatever the case may be. But this book teaches you, it puts players into different sort of archetypes. So it explains to you how to sort of understand these people and how you need to engage with them. And once you build that relationship with that player and you sort of win them over, if I can call it that, those players will do anything for you. So I was telling you about the example, and going back to Jeremy and Jubs with the Wessel First side. You mentioned I think you spoke to Jeremy earlier on in the week, and yeah, obviously that sort of life skills or sort of life coaching mornings where the guys would meet in the auditorium and speak about different topics, and trying to build the guys' characters and trying to get them to become sort of better men. And when they leave school, sports aside, get them to be really good humans. I think that really helps with creating that buy-in from my side. So I think they sort of get those values of wanting to work harder, wanting to really put in that effort. And I think what that gives the players, it gives them confidence through knowledge. So they know they've been through the trenches through the off season. They've put in the effort, and it definitely builds their confidence. In terms of my experience with so nurturing that sort of getting guys to buy into the system is just also sometimes just listening to people, listening to players, going out of your way to help them with something small, putting that little small touch in. And I think that sort of definitely gets you on the right track. Like I've worked with some of the SA men's hockey players, and sometimes we forget that they're just normal people, just like you and I. They may be playing for their country, but sometimes the guys also have the insecurities. They just want to be treated like humans. You know what I mean? Have a bit of a joke, a bit of a banter, make their environment as comfortable as possible. Good communication. Just be real to them, and I found that works really well. And keeping things fun and exciting and entertaining also sort of builds on them building into your culture. A lot of people will see conditioning coaches as guys who just sort of write down programs on boards, but it's the S&C coaches who really take the time to teach their athletes. You'll see a guy squatting, go and sort of help him, show him exactly what he's doing wrong. You know what I mean? Put the little effort into the small things, and I think that will sort of help you in the long run. In terms of building a foundation, one thing, especially working at Westville, was we noticed a lot of the guys coming out of primary schools were struggling with basic things like core exercises. So the one day I was doing a session with some of the under 14 cricket guys, and I mean, we're looking at guys who were the sort of top players in the province, and we did like a basic core-based movement, and these guys were sort of nowhere. So like here I'm thinking, these guys are the top in their trade with really poor core strength. So you think what you could actually sort of get them to be if they had that sort of development. So we try to now sort of teach players from the younger sort of age groups, teach them how to move, teach them those basic patterns, get them into that squatting movement, maybe not with weights or whatever the case should be, teach them how to do a push-up. So get them moving well, teaching them those foundations, and then you'll see it kind of by the time they get to under 16 and open, they've got that foundation for when you actually start loading them up with weight. And I think that sort of balance between education and starting the guys early really, really helps. The last part I wanted to chat, sorry, it's my answer's getting quite long here, but I am extremely passionate about this, is things like creating competitions. So fun stuff between the guys, who can get the most push-ups, who can get the most pull-ups, joking around with the guys, you know what I mean, having a bit of fun, playing music at your sessions, giving the guys sort of opportunities and different chances to play the music. It creates a family environment, and I think that definitely sort of helps in getting the guys to buy into those philosophies.
Yeah, Myles, I think that's fantastic to hear. You know, I've been fortunate enough to be a part or to witness the stuff that you do as the collective team. And it's so encouraging if you're not a part of that to hear that you mentioned the word culture. And I think that's so important. And it's so encouraging to know that you have the players, you have the coach, you have all the different coaches, you have the conditioning coach, and you're all on the same page. You're all speaking the same language. You invest in values as much as you want them to perform at a high level and win games. I mean, obviously that's the goal, but if you're investing in the value and appreciating people like human beings and teaching them leadership skills, then your culture is just so strong, and the winning just becomes second nature. So it's encouraging, I think, for people that are not involved to hear that how you are all tied in together, and the communication between the coach and the conditioning coach is really the heart of the team. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'm going to put you in a little bit of a difficulty here. You know, many schools are blessed today, and really is an encourager. This is a positive thing, but many schools are blessed with multi-talented sportsmen. You know, players who maybe excel in 2 or more sports at a very competitive level. And the nature of terms in the schools allows them to play, for example, cricket, and then flip over to rugby, and then maybe to football, to soccer, a little bit of water polo, whatever the case may be. How do you balance their training conditioning program to ensure that they're at optimum level for each sport and avoid overtraining or injury? And maybe on the injury part, you can also just elaborate what are some of the common symptoms of overtraining?
Gav, it is a tough question, and it's something that is very practical in essence. That we've got a lot of guys that are are very good across two sporting codes that kind of overlap from season to season. So often you'll get guys who are really good at cricket, say cricket and hockey. They've got obviously very skilled with sort of hand-eye coordination and that sort of thing. And it is a challenge. I'll give you a couple of examples. Gareth Bevan, who matriculated last year, the guy was part of the sort of leadership at the school, very strong with his academics, played Cokeweed cricket, that's under 19 Natal cricket side, and he also ended up making the Natal Academy side rugby. So these guys have really, really loaded sort of schedules. There's a lot going on. And one of the most important things there is to have communication. And that obviously you just spoke about that now. Communication is so key between the coaches. So your directors of your different sports and your head coaches of those teams, it's very key to have that sort of that open sort of book communication and actually sort of, it's a give take system. So say for example, with Gareth especially, he would be in first term, he would be having cricket practices, but at the same time, his preseason rugby would be on the go. So with those coaches sort of maybe having a meeting on a Friday for the following week, you can just say, okay, right, it's important that he hits his cricket session on the Tuesday. He'll miss out on X, Y, and Z at the rugby, but as long as we all on the same page, we know what he's doing, I can then manage his load and say, okay, right, he's missing out on this over here, but he's picking it up somewhere else. It's the communication that is really key. In terms of recovery and nutrition, like you need to make sure that you're just checking up on these guys. Obviously, sleep is so important. Guys getting a solid 8 hours of sleep a night is really key. Obviously, when you're training, you're getting that muscle breakdown, and a majority of the recovery happens when you're sleeping. So it's so key to get those 8 hours in. Also making sure that the guys are getting adequate nutrition in. So it just takes a bit of communication with that player, sort of sending them a message, checking up how they're doing, and just sort of keeping an eye on them and making sure that they're not getting overloaded. So as I said, communication is key. Making sure they're ticking the box in terms of their recovery. They're also keeping up with their academics. There's smaller things that you can do. So you can even just sort of maybe chat to the boys' teachers, see how attentive they are in class. Sometimes they can pick up, okay, he's looking a bit sluggish, they're losing their concentration span. And sort of it's easy to do. It just takes a conversation to get a little bit of inside knowledge, and it sort of helps you decide whether you need to sort of pull back on their training. In terms of signs, like I've seen guys show signs of overtraining. Generally, the first thing is actually motivation. You'll see that they arrive at training and you can see they're just lacking a bit of energy. They're down. Sometimes they're irritable. They can get snappy with their mates, like their sense of humor goes. Those are generally the first signs come sort of from the psychological aspect. And then later, you may find that the guy picks up an injury. He's just been loaded too hard. Obviously, that's why it is key to keep an eye on how much work they're doing. And as I mentioned earlier, some stuff like GPS and your RPE scales, which is your rate of perceived exertion. Those are small things that you can do. They don't cost much to just sort of follow that sort of wellness sort of protocol and checking up on the guys, monitoring their weight and that sort of thing. And generally, if you tick those boxes, you can pick up if a guy is showing those signs of overtraining. And you need to also let the boys know that there's an open door policy. If they feel like they are struggling, they're not keeping up, they need to know that they can walk into your office at any stage and say, "Sir, I'm not coping," or whatever the case may be. As long as they know that open channel communication is there, you're not going to bite the head off if they can't make a session. I'm the first one to say, if I see a guy struggling, pull him out of the session, let him watch from the side, and come Saturday, he's going to benefit from actually missing out on the session because he's going to be fresher in the long run.
Great, Myles. And I think if I can use this time to thank you, and also a lot of other sports conditioning coaches, it's that communication that's so key, and the interest that you show in the boy. you know, you could easily, it's not easy. And I think you're not giving yourself enough credit there to take a boy like Gareth Bevan, who you mentioned. It's a continual discussion, and it's continually checking each and every single day and monitoring exactly what he does. So yeah, that's massive credit to you, massive credit to ensure that he's at his optimum level and that he's performing. And I know that's ultimately your goal, that he is performing at a high level in every sport that he does. So yeah, thank you on behalf of all the boys that you invested. Myles, lastly, school sports has changed over the past few years, for better, for worse. I mean, we can discuss that in depth, but more particularly, it has become very competitive, and many elite athletes are training all year round. I mean, I could think maybe a decade ago, preseason rugby probably started 2 weeks before the actual first fixture. Now these boys are training 24/7 almost the whole year round. What are your feelings on the current school sports structures in terms of the competitiveness and the pressures that are placed on these young athletes?
Yeah, Gav, that is a tough question. Obviously, there is a lot of competition between schools. There's that sort of connotation where results affects marketing. You've got guys coming out of school looking to sort of secure contracts at varsities. You know, I mean, opportunities to go get free university education. There's a variety of factors that affect that, but the bottom line is there is a lot of pressure on these guys. Like they often, you'll see there's loads of parents on the sidelines. Parents can be a problem at times. A lot of times you'll see guys just pressure from all angles, and sometimes it's tough on them. So, like, I don't know, I've noticed that sometimes, especially with social media being so prominent today, sometimes it's like it can be a bit of a popularity contest. You know what I mean? Folks are posting videos of all their highlights reels. Sometimes that can sort of not be a good thing, because everyone's trying to sort of push each other for the wrong reasons. So that is a tough one, Gav. And I think along with that culture that we spoke about earlier, if you can sort of nurture guys sort of along the right lines into molding them into the right people, I think that also helps them deal with a lot of that pressure. If they can sort of get as grounded as possible and realize why they're doing things, and that there's something greater than just the sport that they're playing on Saturday, I think that can help. But that generally just comes from having that communication and trying to sort of assure them on ticking the right boxes. And a lot of times, if you focus on those right things, the results will follow, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, it is a tough one, and it is definitely something I think needs to be looked at in the future. An opportunity possibly to help kids at school these days is to work on ways to help them deal with these kind of pressures, and also make them understand why there are these kinds of pressure.
Yeah, I love what you say about teaching them those values. I think that's so important. You as much as that's a God-given talent and they are blessed to be able to perform on a high stage in the sport, those conversations, like you say, the communication from the coach, from you, from parents, to say your character and your humility, etc., that's really going to take them the resilience. I mean, the hard work that they're putting in with you behind the scenes is certainly going to make them grow into a better person, hopefully not to get involved in the negative aspects of those. Myles, but I just want to really thank you, really, from the bottom of my heart, for giving up your time, for sharing your wisdom in a topic that sometimes I think needs to be more spoken about, so people are fully aware of the hard work that's getting behind the scenes. You know, it is a massive, massive part of being on a high performance, managing, being able to stay at a high performance for these sportsmen. And if I can give you credit, I mean, from knowing you well, I know that you give 100% plus in everything you do. I've seen you there way before 5 a.m. and way after, when the sun's gone down, helping these boys, investing in these boys. And all you really want is just the best for these boys. So it's just encouraging to know that there are people like you out there that are giving your time to these boys so that they can excel in their dreams and make their dreams a reality. I know if I can, from personal experience too, I mean, my first comrades, we actually did the route tested together. And You were a very, very large part of why I actually finished that race, with the advice that you gave me and everything else. So I want to thank you for that. And thanks for giving up your time. And it's highly, highly beneficial, all the wisdom that you shared. Thank you, Myles.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gav. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank you for everything that you're doing and making these kinds of resources available for people to learn from, especially now that we have a little bit more time on our hands. I think with that whole theme a theme that I've been using is that you can learn something from everyone that you deal with. So for all the people listening to this, is that be observant, ask questions, always see how people do things and why people do things. There's so many great coaches that I've worked with over the last few years that, you know what I mean, I'll take something from here, something from there, and all of that will in the long run build yourself up and build the skill set that you have in order to actually provide a better service and better advice for the boys that we're working with today.
Great. Thanks, Myles. And hopefully we, after this lockdown, we get together and not have to discuss over a laptop. Again, but I really appreciate everything.
Thanks so much, Gav. Stay safe and we'll chat to you soon.